Okay, class. So this is the chapter of reversible and irreversible changes. So first you need to know that there are changes in matter, and changes in matter can be brought about by two things. Number one is mixing, and number two is heating. So for example, if you mix salt and water, it results in salty water. If you mix fruit salt and water, it results in some bubbling, and that bubbling is because of carbon dioxide which is produced. Then if you mix baking powder and water, and then if you mix eggshells with vinegar, there's again mixing. But this mixing basically results in some sort of changes. Just like that, when you heat something, for example, if you heat an egg, or it can be boiled or it can be fried. So when you look at the two kinds of eggs, they're different in terms of texture, they're different in terms of taste. And if you decompose the sugar, then the decomposition is basically breaking down something into smaller substances, right? So when you decompose the sugar, a black solid called carbon and water vapor are basically produced. Then if you melt a chocolate and if you melt an ice, so basically you see that both of these things, when you mix or when you heat, there are some sort of changes which are produced. Now these changes can be classified as reversible changes or irreversible changes. Class, remember the literal meaning of the word. If you look at the literal meaning of the word reverse means something that can be changed back, something that can be brought back, right? So reversible is when there is no new material that is formed, and then you can get back the ingredients. Whereas irreversible is that new material forms and then you cannot get back the ingredient. This is called irreversible. Negative connotation is added to that of reversible, right? Now, example of a reversible reaction is that salt and water, for example, forms a salty water, and we all know, we learned a chapter more about dissolving, and we got to know that salt, being soluble in water, can be basically separated by a physical process called evaporation. And sand, being an insoluble substance, when it mixes with water, then you can get back the sand by a physical process called filtration. Now, if you talk about irreversible processes, then for example, rusting. So, rusting is a process in which iron reacts with oxygen in the air to form a rust. So, something that we commonly call as zung is basically rusting. So, this is an irreversible reaction since you cannot get back the iron and the oxygen from a rust that is formed. And then heating sugar, which is basically decomposition, is also an irreversible change. Now, let's talk about the reversible changes due to heat in more detail. So, for example, if you talk about the changes of state, so remember changes of state are always reversible. So, when you heat something, it gains heat. Gains mean that it basically gets heat. So, and when you put something in refrigerator, then you're basically taking out all the heat from it. As you know, something cools down, it is called the loss of heat. So heat gain can bring about changes of state such as melting. For melting, we all know we need to give an object some sort of heat to change it from solid to liquid. Then for evaporation and boiling, in order to change something from liquid to a gaseous state, you again need heat. So heat gain, that means heat is taken up by that matter or by that object. If you talk about loss of heat, then loss of heat can bring about changes of state as well, such as condensation and freezing. So condensation is basically when gaseous state changes into a liquid state, and when freezing is basically when some liquid state changes into a solid state. So basically when there's loss of heat, the particles they get near one another and they get closer to basically one another. Now there are some irreversible changes associated with heat as well, right? So burning. So burning is basically an irreversible change. For burning, remember there's an important gas because of which burning takes place, and that is oxygen. Without oxygen, there's no burning. So let's talk about candle burning. So candle burning can be divided into a reversible part and an irreversible part. So let's talk about a reversible part. So reverse means that you can get back something, right? And we just learned that changes of state is basically reversible. So, the wax is solid in state. Once you lit the candle, due to the heat that is generated from that flame, the solid wax changes into a liquid wax. So this is basically the change of state. Then this liquid wax, it gets drawn up the wick. So wick is a thread-like thing in the candle, right? So now, due to more heat produced due to flame, that liquid wax is then changed into wax vapors. So this part where there is change of state, this is the reversible part. Now let's come to the irreversible part. So the wax vapors which are formed when they combine with oxygen, then they burn to produce carbon dioxide, water vapor, and carbon, which is also called a black soot. Now let's talk about flammable, or in other terms this is also called inflammable. So flammable or flammable basically means any material that can burn easily. So they should be kept away from fire or extreme heat because they can easily catch fire. Now heat is needed to start a material burning. So in order to burn something you need heat. And when something burns, it produces a lot of energy, and that energy is mostly in the form of heat and light. So that's all irreversible and reversible changes. That's an extremely easy chapter. Please go through the book as well. And that's it from my side.